Gracias for pressing play y welcome to Smart Chickens, a working together, smarter, where diversity meets innovation and growth podcast. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Dr. Bob Preziosi. We have an interesting conversation around his 30-plus year career in HR and leadership development consulting in academia. He's a sought-out executive HR professional speaker, former president of ASTD, that's the American Society for Training and Development, author of The Leadership Road, educator, leadership development consultant, and former Fortune 50 VP of HR leadership and talent management. We discuss his point of view around the changing demographics of the workforce from Generation Xers, baby boomers, millennials, and now the workforce entrance of Generation Z, and the need for more leadership training to create better career paths and mentoring opportunities for future leaders. As always, this podcast is brought to you by our good friends at digitechie.com, a conversational marketing, demand gen, and revenue accelerator consultancy, helping B2B clients scale sales pipelines to drive new revenue consistently. And gypsyforever.com, uniquely handmade wellness products that help you connect your mind, body, and soul to achieve a better balance too. So vamos, without further ado, here's Dr. Bob Preziosi. Welcome to the Smart Chickens podcast, a podcast dedicated to discuss innovation and diversity and how that drives growth and awareness in organizations in different industries. So today we have a very special guest with us, two special guests, Dr. Bob Preziosi, formerly president of ASTD, consultant with HR and leadership talent groups in Fortune 100, Fortune 500 companies in the US around his 30-plus year career. And we also have with us today Karishma Veljee. She's the co-founder of Digital Hire. It's an HR tech hiring, video interview, and platform, and more. And we're going to discuss today simply, what are all the complexities of the landscape in HR and talent management with two authorities on the subject. So, Dr. Preziosi, again, thank you for your time and welcome.
My pleasure.
Tell us a little bit about your background, origin story as it relates to leadership and talent management. So that we have an idea of kind of your journey, and then we can start discussing a little bit about the topic around the landscape of HR and how it's changing.
Okay, we can do that. After trying to be a high school teacher and realizing all I wanted to do in high school was coach football, I left and I got a job as a leadership development executive for a not-for-profit organization. And I hung with that for a few years. And then I became a director of HR in a large social service agency where I had opportunity to broaden my perspective to cover everything imaginable in HR. And to give you an idea, none of it was digital at that point. No technology involved. So I enjoyed that, but then a Fortune 50 company came looking for a director of training and management development, and I jumped right in, became a vice president. We had lots of successful programs and culture changes there. And then the place turned upside down. It got bought, and that got bought, and that got bought. The history is probably an arm's length long. So thus began my career in academia, where I was engaged for 30 years, teaching, managing. I was dean of the business school a couple times. I was acting dean, actually, and then they found out I couldn't act like one, so we can't make this guy a permanent one. He doesn't even know how to act like one. So 30 years of that, and all of it was leadership and HR. That's all I taught. During that time, of course, I did a lot of consulting with companies like American Express, AT&T, Citrix, and so on. And I took a short gig that was kind of fun. I did one-day seminars for the University of Miami, where you traveled to 5 cities in 5 days, like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego. And then I'd fly back home, give everybody a hug, wash the clothes, and get ready and go again. And that was possible because my teaching was usually on the weekend. And it wasn't every weekend, so I worked around that. So I did lots of fun things, and then a couple of years ago, I decided, I think I'm gonna take a break from this. And they offered a buyout, a really good buyout. So I took that and moved from Fort Lauderdale to St. Petersburg. And here I am doing presentations here and there. I have one client in all places that's back in Fort Lauderdale, but thanks to technology, I can do it all from here. I was doing it live, but you guys know the story. We're all doing a lot more electronically and on Zoom. And it's not just because of the pandemic, it's because that's what's there. That's what people are using. That's what they're used to. So I wrote a lot along the way. I wrote a couple of books. I edited 5 books. Actually, I wrote 3 books, I guess. And 2 of them are 100% online books. So that's kind of like my story in a nutshell. And everything was about leadership or HR. As a matter of fact, one of the things I did was somebody introduced the term talent management. And I think that's about 20 years ago. I'm not sure. And I jumped right on it. I searched for a book on talent management. Bingo, there was one. So I said, well, let's turn this into a course and put it in our MBA program for HR folks. And then we also put it in, we had a master's degree in HR. So those are some of the things that happened along the way. I could probably talk the whole hour, but I don't want to do that. So
yeah, no, that's great to give us a little color of your background. And obviously, the school you're talking about for 30 years is the Huizenga School of Business for Nova Southern University, probably one of the largest private institutions in the Southeast. So yeah, that's incredible to not only be in the private sector, but also do a bit of academic and consulting, and then have a nice buyout as your exit strategy.
right.
That's nice.
At one time, Gianni, the Huizenga College of Business and Entrepreneurship had the largest MBA program in the state of Florida. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah,
And then
I believe it. I mean, the endowment funds were from the who's who of millionaires and billionaires of South Florida. Wayne Huizenga, who I think most people, if they don't know who Wayne Huizenga is, was I think you mentioned it. One of the only CEOs that was the CEO of 3 Fortune 500 companies at one point, right?
that was him.
Video.
Yes, he's the only one to ever have 3 Fortune 500 companies.
Yeah, I believe it was Blockbuster Video, Waste Management, and AutoNation. So
those are they.
Yeah, pretty impressive. And you obviously had the pleasure and to be able to meet with him and talk to him, because he was part of the executive board meetings that happened at that university. But so because of your background, I'm really curious, and I have Karishma around HR tech scene, which is what Digital Hire is involved in. With this generational workforce that you've seen it progress and go into, baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, and Generation Zs, how are we, trying to navigate these cross-generational workforce and leveraging technology as well as figuring out a way to kind of have the leadership continuum, right? The talent management. And if you could give us a little bit of your take on that, and then Karishma, if you could describe a little bit of how your platform is impacting that would be great.
Yeah, there is no broad wave of any generation working to connect and get along with and increase their respect for other generations. It's going on in some companies and it's going on with some individuals. But this whole business about what generation are you, quote unquote, oh, well, I'm this generation, loses perspective that it doesn't matter. I'm Karishma, and here's what I've done, and here's what I can do.
Yeah.
I'm Gianni. Here's what I've done, and here's what I can do. And, you know, inclusion popped up, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago in a big way when Oprah said something about it. I was teaching my MBA students, all business professionals and executives, average age 32, about inclusion in the 90s. Put your arms around everyone and make it work. I mean, you need to be able to talk to everybody about everything. And I think if you work on that, you can be successful. Now, some organizations have instituted training programs where they use cross generational learnings, quote unquote, to try to build greater camaraderie, a stronger culture, better teams, and so on and so forth. And that can work pretty well. I think, though, the basic philosophy of we are in this together is the approach that people should take. Some people are happy with what generation they belong to, others are not. I have children and they're just at the edge of one generation. And I mistakenly once said something about the other generation that they're close to, and they said, "Oh, no, we're not. We don't want to be part of that generation. We're happy with the one we are."
So what do you think about that, those sort of dynamics, Karishma? Like knowing what, you're obviously in without having, to your point, Dr. Preziosi, define us by generation. I think sort of what your platform does is it separates that a bit too, right? Because it's about the person's talent, right? Regardless of where they're at. So what are some of your thoughts, Karishma, on that
Yeah,
subject?
for sure. I definitely agree. When you look at a company or an organization, it's such a melting pot of generations. And where we come in and are trying to make a difference is really in that early career stage, or really looking to hire the future leaders of any company. So if you think about it, who are the people that are entering the workforce right now? Right? It's the either the tail end of my generation, which is millennials, or it's the Gen Zs. And what we really know about them is that they're very informed generation, right? They're more socially conscious. They care about, making a positive impact, and they look for things that, they prioritize things differently just in general. So, it's very important to be able to relate to them and then speak in their own language, because we also know that this generation is the most tech savvy generation that there's ever been. I don't think they can relate to our dial-up days or our, big fat monitor days. They grew up with cell phones. They grew up with technology, and they really are also globally connected and super creative, because this is, you look at Snapchat, you look at TikTok, you look at Clubhouse. These are the people that really know how to, personally brand themselves. So our whole idea of creating digital hire is, are we really going to get to know them, or really anybody, just by a piece of paper? Because if you think about the recruiting, world in general, there's such a long-standing practice of, the Boolean search, keyword mechanism of the ATS, right? So you have the software that you plug in a couple keywords in, and then it spits out hundreds of resumes, that have that keyword. But is that really a good way to find the person that's going to be a long-term fit for your company? Because I think it's really, sometimes we get so tunnel visioned about hiring to just fill a position that we stop thinking about the long-term impacts that a person or any hire can have on a company. So what we're trying to do is, excuse me, what we're trying to do is, not only just hire at the first step, but also include your retention strategy at the first step as well, because it really doesn't start, once a person starts in the company, but your retention strategy really starts from the first time you communicate with them. And if you aren't able to communicate with them on a deeper level than just the ATS, or just a standardized assessment or an automated email chain, are you really going to find somebody that's a good organizational and a good cultural fit for your company? So that's where we come in, and what we're trying to do is really provide a platform for candidates and employers to understand each other in a more humanized and a more personalized way, which is through video.
That sounds like a great approach to it, because that's what people are familiar with. That do you use cell phones a lot?
Yeah,
You,
so absolutely. So our apps we have an iPhone, Android app. The idea is to make hiring more accessible, not only for employers but for candidates as well. So obviously, everyone has a cell phone. They can do an interview on the go, things like that.
And I wanted to ask you around the leadership question. Thank you, Karishma, for that, because for for someone at a level of, you're a VP of a Fortune 50 or even a mid-sized company and growing, and there's a talent war right now, right? So probably the last couple of years, with both a good economy and a downturn economy, you get more applicants right now per position. And so that's like a good problem to have potentially for an employer who is trying to get the best talent possible. But at the same time, there's, I think a for that potential hire, they also have more choices than ever, right? So how do you balance that? And then from your perspective, Dr. Preziosi, when you're sitting at that, C-level, and you've got hiring managers, you've got, division line managers that are trying to say, hey, how are we going to grow this business, and how are we going to increase our retention? How are we going to put our costs of onboarding at a down, percentage versus the year before because we had maybe too much turnover or what have you? How does one at that position balance that? And how important do you think is hiring right the first time versus hiring, maybe the wrong candidate and having to start all over?
well, I think anybody who settles for second best or third best has kind of set themselves up for a bit of failure, maybe a major failure. Maybe that person's gone in 3 months or a year. And I realize that sometimes you can't get your first choice because of money or location, although location seems like less of an issue these days. If you really, really, really need this person, if they came out number one, you need to come out with the bucks. You need to have the money. Now, that's easy for me to say because I always had the bucks. That was never a problem. But I think what we're trying to do now is catching up with leadership development, leadership training for both Xers, although Xers have received more of it than millennials. There's more and more of that going on around the world. And I think that's good because, as we all know, boomers are slowly but surely leaving these senior executive positions, even mid-level executive positions. Wherever they were in the wherever they go in the organization, they're leaving. And we have to have people ready and raring to go. And it's not just the training, it's making sure they have a mentor. If you're not speaking with a mentor from time to time as you're developing your leadership skills, you've got one step behind everybody else who's out there in the leadership landscape. So you need a mentor, and more, and gosh, I bet I thought about this 20 or 30 years ago. They need to be learning through little bloops of information slash skill that you send to their cell phone that they can listen for 1 to 3 minutes and pick up some useful tip, and those need to be cataloged so that if they've just had something happen at work, they can go back into that system and dial something up as a refresher. Do I need to go back and do something? What should I do next time? I mean, I came up with the idea, but I didn't have any investors, couldn't find any investors. But I think now a lot of people realize the value of that, and there's some of that going on. So, Karishma, there's a line of business for you if you're not into it already. Make these little 1 to 3 minute leadership videos and
True.
that they can go into their cell phone and look at.
It's so true because I feel like as business owners or executive teams and, leaders in an organization, it's really the tone that we set around, talent management, acquisition, what have you, that's really going to translate into the hiring strategies at the very bottom level. So just the way we teach our teams on how to make, important decisions by thinking about the long term, whether it's an investment, acquisition, or what have you. I think we need to start thinking the same way with each hire as well, as to think about the long term. And then the other piece where you talked about is just osmosis. I feel like in order to produce future leaders, you need that osmosis to happen for them to absorb and learn, what you're trying to achieve in the long run as well. So that's really, it's up to us to be creative these days with everything being remote to create that. And obviously those videos that you said are one of the options. But I think coming up with ways to give them exactly what they need to become the future leaders of tomorrow, whether it's through osmosis, or through teaching them emotional intelligence or just decision making. I think that's a very, very big responsibility as we grow to, look for longevity in our businesses.
Yeah,
It's nice to
absolutely.
hear you mention emotional intelligence. That keeps popping up. And at one point last year, one experienced leadership development executive thought emotional intelligence was the most important thing that people needed to learn, regardless of generation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll also chime in, and I think that sort of that gap, right? I think that leadership gap that exists between, let's say, mid-level director role to an individual contributor. Typically you need to have a bit of a consistent training program to help that individual contributor that shows promise through sort of mentorship, as you're talking about, Dr. Preziosi, get to the next level, and sort of that succession planning. So then that director or executive can also send down the rope, do some mentorship, do some leadership training, and bring that person up, right? In your experience working with Fortune, 50 companies, how do you structure that so that you're having a nice kind of, bench, if you will, right, in the lineup? How would you advise, and how can they leverage things like technology, HR technology, like Digital Hire has, with videos and assessments that are on demand? What are your thoughts around that, Dr. Preziosi?
Well, first of all, I think you need a senior executive and you need a vice president of leadership development. Now, if you only got 100 employees, that's probably not going to work, but you better find someone to take those accountabilities somewhere in your 100 people. But I think a vice president of leadership development has the vision of the organization. Where is it going? Where is the business going? What do people need to learn to be able to be successful as the future unfolds? Leadership development, yes, it's a little bit of now, but mostly it's how are we getting to tomorrow successfully?
Mm-hmm.
10 months ago, I think people were wondering a lot, how are we going to get where and when are we going to get there and what's it going to look like? So I probably would have been teaching them how to do scenario analysis, which runs, in 3-month or 6-month blocks. So you give this leadership development executive full reign, And he or she, of course, works with other vice presidents to identify people that they think have a future as a responsible person for more and more leadership opportunities. And I probably would establish some kind of a leadership development group. And I would engage them in a number of ways. First of all, I would probably have them double check the recommendations of people that come in. Second, I would have them review all the curriculum that was used. Third, I'd involve them in the teaching of leadership. And fourth, I would make sure that they scan constantly the environment, not just for their business, but for the business environment in their country and in the world, so that they're making some key helping comments to the vice president of leadership development that he or she can operationalize. We got to make sure we have a cadre of mentors also. And the leadership development executive should probably seek those folks out after talking with the folks who are going to be involved as leadership development, quote unquote, students. And I think that that kind of conversation will get us the best possible mentor. And then the vice president of leadership development probably needs to talk with the mentor, make sure the mentor understands what's being done. You know what? This sounds like you need two people as vice president of leadership development. I got them doing so much work. One person probably couldn't do it. But all these things are essential and necessary. And I think the leadership development executive needs to make sure that these folks are doing some reading along the way, some good leadership books, and then have conversations about them in a class setting, either in a Zoom setting or live, depending upon how the corporation is approaching things. There are lots of folks who are going to make everybody go back to work. Um, I was hoping that there wouldn't be much of that, but there's going to be a lot more than we think based upon what I've been reading the last couple of months. And that's too bad, because that means we're going to get pollution back on the road with people driving their cars around and so on and so forth. However, it'll be good for the restaurant because they'll be serving lunch to those folks.
So yeah, you brought up a point about right now the economy and the pendulum swinging back to the work from home not going to be 90%, maybe it's going to be 60%. And there might be, I've heard studies and read studies about, maybe that pendulum swinging back to, cities that might have, hybrid, 60% people in the office, 40% remote, especially if they're in services that are like the knowledge economy, right? So software companies and the like. Question about, because you're talking about mentorship and leadership, question about how much should a candidate these days invest in themselves, right? Outside of the traditional, career, higher education. But do you think right now we're at a point in time where candidates, because it's so competitive, right, should be investing in themselves outside of just, the getting the diploma and the degree? And what I mean by that is there's communities out there, there's mentorship communities out there, or there's platforms like Digital Hire that can allow for sort of that community building mentorship to actually, be established. And should a candidate now be thinking, I can't leave it all just to chance and my diploma and my degree and my credentials. I should invest in proactively letting people know who I am, what my skill set is, and kind of raising the hand, a little bit more prominently than before. What are your thoughts about that? And also, Karishma, if you could chime in on this one, I'm curious to understand what new hires and new folks entering the workforce, or even folks that are middle of the line and are having to change because of, they got furloughed or they see an opportunity in another sector, how should they be investing in themselves outside of traditional higher education?
Karishma, would you like to go first, or do you
Sure.
want me to go first?
Sure, I can go. So
Go ahead.
honestly, what I think is that it is now more crucial than ever to, invest in yourself, whether it's your knowledge or your personal brand or just the way, the world or the recruiting world or the employers view you. Because right before COVID, right, what we know is that 70% of candidates were passive job seekers, right? So that makes the job market very interesting because the candidates now have the ball, right? What that means is that it's the employer's responsibility to break through the noise and then, stand out. But it's also the candidates now, because of the situation with COVID-19 and all the layoffs, it's more competitive than ever to stand out. So in order to break through the noise, right? So to your exact point about higher education, why is it that more and more companies now don't require a college degree, right? Some big companies do. Now, I'm not saying that that's, going to completely change and higher education is not going to be valuable, but over the years, companies and just us as society have realized that an education can't really guarantee that a person is going to be a good fit in any position, right? We talk so much about soft skills. We talk about cultural, adaptivity or cultural fit and organizational fit. So I think in order to gauge that at the hiring stage is super important. Now, if you think about it, is it really possible to gauge that from a piece of paper or a resume that was, pre-formulated from a template anyway, right? So I feel like utilizing video is so crucial for people entering the workforce, whether it's after layoffs or just entering the workforce after education. I think it's a very, very important thing to invest in the way you brand yourself or brand your experiences and stand out in front of employers. So everyone has a resume, but it's only useful if it gets read. You know what I mean? So that's what we're trying to do, is kind of really shake the status quo away from traditional resumes. And one thing we actually just launched is a video resume, right? If you think about it yourself as an employer, how much more of an insight would you have if instead of reading, just a copy paste of a resume, you could actually hear a candidate talk about what they care about, what their goals are, or what they got out of their previous experience. I think that, makes better, deeper communication happen. So that's really what, I truly believe in, which is a testament in, whatever we're trying to do with our company.
Yeah, it is all about brand. And I think when it comes to leadership development, it's up to each individual to identify for himself or herself what kind of opportunities are out there that they could take advantage of. And of course, along with that, they have to really do a major self search. What is it that I can do when it comes to leadership? What do I need to learn when it comes to leadership? And you scroll back, quote unquote, as an individual to what people have said about working with you, how many people have congratulated you about what. And so you do an inventory of what skills you have purposefully or even accidentally developed. And then you identify what you think a leader should know and be able to do. And you can do that very easily by reading or by going to some kind of community education that's either live or online that paints a picture of what leaders need to be able to do now and in the future. And then you work through that, and you need a mentor, and that doesn't have to be someone at work. That can be somebody who you go to some kind of spiritual activities with. It could be some kind of community association like a chamber that you hook into somebody with. And there's so many opportunities out there. And as Karishma mentioned, oh, it's getting more and more competitive. And Lord knows when we get back to normal, it's going to be a new normal, going to be a lot different normal. We need to be prepared for that. And people have to know how to lead from home as well as lead in a live situation when they've got the people in front of them. Oh, leadership by Zoom is going to continue to grow and grow and grow. It's going to zoom off, going to take off. So, yeah, man, what an exciting time to be involved in all this, right, Karishma?
Absolutely.
Whoa.
And, I think there's something that you actually talk about a lot and write about too is situational leadership. And I think a lot of that got tested, this past year, and it's only going to be tested even further. So definitely an exciting time, new norms forming, things like that.
Oh yeah, situational leadership is a dynamite model. I first encountered that when Hersey and Blanchard began writing about it long time ago, and I used some of the tools, and I've always firmly believed in that as a valuable model. I learned the model at the Huizinga College of Business and Entrepreneurship. We developed a master's degree in leadership, and that was the model around which we taught. So, yeah, situational leadership is the way to go because so much is exactly that, situational. And I've had numerous conversations with Paul Hersey, may God rest his soul, and enjoyed all of them and always picked up a tidbit. I did run into Ken Blanchard a couple times, but we never seemed to have time for a conversation. He was always running to something, and I was getting in his way.
Now, I know that you had in your days, you were the former president of ASTD, which is now Talent T&D, right? So that in itself, I'm sure lent you to get in front of these sort of gurus, like you just mentioned, Ken Blanchard and such. You had made a comment on a post about Wired for Disruption, a book written by Hannah Inman, and it was about lane lords or staying in your land. Now that you're talking about the situational leadership, and we're talking about how candidates more than ever need to build a community, find a mentor, so that mentor can help shape their sort of progression. What do you think leaders should think about when thinking about not being a lane lord or blocking progress in leadership from folks that are under them, or even folks that are maybe at the same level in the C-level with them? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, to begin with, when a situation comes up, and sometimes they come up slowly, sometimes they come up quickly. In situational leadership, we would be dictated to by ourselves what makes the most sense here and why does it make the most sense? Do I stay in my lane or do I disrupt? And if I stay in my lane, how long am I going to be in there? And do I have to keep my eyes on the situation? Because at some point, staying in the lane may not be the way to go, and I may have to become disruptive. Now, if you choose the being disruptive, there are lots of ways to be disruptive. And my approach for being disruptive was always on the take it easy. You can run in and grab everybody and throw them all in a pot and move them along. But, I think you need to move slowly with that because things change so quickly that you may be disrupting and all of a sudden you're doing, oh my God, that doesn't make sense anymore. We got to put the brakes on this. Now, I'm sure from time to time there may be an instant when you have to disrupt in a major way. But always remember that staying in the lane and being disruptive each have their own set of consequences for you as a person, as a leader, and for the people you're working with, especially the targets of your disruption or the targets of the lane that you're staying in. So I believe that situation by situation demands that you analyze and see if it's disruptive oriented or if it's staying in the lane. If you have that only philosophy, or if you have only one of those philosophies, that you're a disruptor, period, amen, finished, you're a stay in the lane, period, amen, finished, that's not going to suit you well as a leader. Not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
And in that vein, Karishma and Dr. Preziosi as well. So when you think about knowing how to, find either the mentor or how the mentor is looking for their mentee, there was a lot that went under assessments, right? So you have your DISC assessments and others. How important do you think they are or not? Dr. Karishma first, I guess, and then Dr. Preziosi, if you could, around assessments and helping maybe with this whole leadership and talent management, scenario for new hires or people that are coming into the changing of a workforce from one industry to the next.
Yeah, so I think it's all about creating a win-win situation, right? A win for the employers, a win for the candidates. So I feel what's really valuable just from the recruiting perspective is to, you know, because as a business owner, if you think about it, you're spending a lot of your time doing a lot of different things. But hiring the right people is really the most important factor for the growth and longevity of your business. So I think what's really valuable to the recruiting industry is to, have a candidate that is not just, you know, presenting their resume or cover letter or a video resume even, but it's really valuable for companies to be able to differentiate them based on assessments or whatever the industry standard is. So assessments might not really work for every industry, right? But for some, like sales, which the industry that I come from, it can be massively valuable, right? Because it saves the employer time to go through a lot of candidates to, find the person, or it could really expedite that process to get the top 10% of salespeople, in front of them. So I think assessments, I would say, are very valuable to certain industries, but not others. But either way, I strongly believe that assessments aren't enough. You know what I mean? Because you can look at somebody's sales record and make those decisions, or you can have their DISC assessment, and learn how to work with them better. But I think there has to be a congruence on what their long-term goals are, if they align with what the company is trying to achieve, and so on and so forth. Mentorship is super crucial when it comes to that, just like Dr. Preziosi has said, because it has to be a willingness from both ends to give and take. You know what I mean? It can't just be an employee getting an employee handbook on the first day of work. It has to be more structured than that. It has to be more formal than that, in order to create that osmosis, of transfer of knowledge and leadership skills and things like that.
Yeah, I think the two most popular assessments are DISC and Myers-Briggs. And as Karishma is saying, it's not just difference from industry to industry, but it's also differences from job function to job function. As she said, if you got a lot of sales folks that you need to recruit, you need them to be extroverts. Mm-hmm. So you can test for that using the Myers-Briggs. I don't know if I want an extrovert loaded accounting department, however, because they may be talking more and getting less done. It's okay to be an extrovert, whatever your job is, or to be an introvert, whatever your job is. The key is being able to be both. You need to be an introvert. You need to be an extrovert. No matter what your dominant style is, you need to be able to commit to the behaviors of both, because from situation to situation, it changes. You may be an extrovert one morning, and that's going to change by the afternoon, depending upon what you're doing, who you're dealing with, and so on and so forth. So I haven't taught that in a while, but I always made a major point about learn the behaviors of both, be able to size up the situation and know what's called for. You know, if you're an extrovert, you're going to confront situations where you don't need to be blabbing the whole time. And if you're an introvert, there are times when you know you need to speak up. And so being able to recognize which behaviors to use, I think is real important. But,
Yeah.
being able to use everything, INTJ, ENFP, whatever it is, or in the disc, same thing.
Yeah, I agree. And I would say that it's also very important for leaders to understand, kind of where their team is sort of in either DISC or any assessment. In other words, knowing what's the best way to communicate and get the most out of your team, right?
Oh, yeah.
So that's also important. I think from an assessment perspective, it's not just about that person's assessment, but more importantly, probably from a leader's perspective, is understanding really sort of what makes your team tick, right? So yeah, thanks for that. I think that is definitely something that for leadership development, it gets at some point in leadership development gets spoken about or gets kind of introduced. Now, you did mention about leaderships, and I think leaders, are readers. And I know that you obviously are a writer and author, but also you consume your knowledge through other, experts' experiences and knowledge. What are some books that you would recommend around leadership? Maybe two that you think are really, time tested and could work even in today's, environment.
Okay. Can I have more than two?
You can have as many as you want.
Okay. Well, first of all, read The Leadership Road by this character, Bob Preziosi. Read High Output Management by Andy Grove, former chairman of Intel. It's an old book, but it's a super book. Now, Gary Hamel has a great new book, HAMEL, called Humanocracy, and it's about democratizing the workplace. And I mean, it's just super. And I've had a hand in two or three places democratizing the workplace. And there are examples in that book from all over the globe of how people were successful with that. And then I think, The Leadership Challenge by Kuznets and Posner, Situational Mindsets by Mary Lippitt. And then Rosabeth Moss Cantor has a new book out you might want to look at. It's called Think Outside the Building. I just like that idea so much. Think outside the building. Because not only are we thinking outside the building, we're acting outside the building. So those are some things I would recommend. I'd start out with High Output Management. Oh, no, wait a minute. No, start out with The Leadership Road. Sorry about that.
Always.
Yep. And Karishma, do you have one or two that you might want to share for folks that are going to be listening to this episode as well?
Sure. So I would say, based off of today's conversation, the book I would recommend is Good to Great, which is Jim Collins. And, the whole conversation that we've had about, as a leader, figuring out who is meant to be the best for which role, I think that's really what he does a good job explaining in the book about, as a leader, figure out who first and then what. So getting the right people on the bus is important, and then deciding where to drive the bus. And then also he talks about, switching around people's seats on the bus. So really figuring out, who's the best fit for what role, which goes well with what we discussed. And I think the other one is a very well-read book, Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell. I truly believe in the origin story mattering in who you become. And obviously that's what your podcast is about, Gianni. So that aspect of it, who you are cannot really be separated from where you're from or what you've gone through, because especially in my personal life or my professional life, that has had a huge impact. And I think that's where the concept of, mastering your craft also comes from, with the 10,000 hours of practice. So I'm a big believer in that as well. So those would be my top two for today.
Those are great. So for you, Dr. Preziosi, thank you again for all this wonderful sharing, brain share, knowledge, and discussion chat we had with you today. For people that want to get a hold of you or contact you, what are some ways they can contact you via LinkedIn, email? If you could give that, I'll make sure to put all this on the show notes.
Sure.
What are some ways that folks can contact you?
They can email me. That's probably the best way. And then if that needs to turn into a dialogue, either online or telephone, we'll do it. And they can reach me, all lowercase, Dr. Bob Preziosi, Dr. Bob, etc., at gmail.com. And there may be other, well, there are other addresses they can reach me at: preziosi@nova.edu, all lowercase. And I respond to everyone as quickly as I possibly can. And I'd love to chat with anybody at any time about anything.
Sounds good. And for you, Karishma, how can folks get a hold of you to learn more about digital hire and the landing HR landscape and technology?
Yeah, I'm all open for any conversation around any of those topics or anything. Super approachable, so you can contact me on LinkedIn. I have a calendar link on my LinkedIn. You can, book a call, or Gianni, you can also put my email here.
Absolutely, I'll do that. So again, thank you so much both for being part of this conversation, this dialogue at the Smart Chickens podcast, where diversity drives innovation and growth. I'll definitely be checking out the book recommendations. Some had very interesting titles, and some are kind of tried and true, like Jim Collins, good to great. So thanks again. Have a wonderful rest of the day and week.
Thanks, you too. Great to be together with you, Karishma.
You as well, Dr. Preziosi.
Yeah.